Katie Beers had a difficult childhood. Her mother abandoned her when she was a child. Her godmother accepted her home on the condition that she do all the duties, cook the meals, and serve as a servant. Meanwhile, when she was 2, her uncle began abusing her, making her life a terrible hell. She had no idea how bad things were about to get. Hello and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am telling the well-known story of the girl in the wall, known as Catherine Beers or Katie Beers. So without further ado, let's get into it. Katie Beers, a little girl from Mastic Beach, Long Island, was born on December 30th, 1982, right between Christmas and New Year's Eve. Katie Beers, 9 years old, was given up by her mother and turned into a slave by her great-aunt and her sexually deviant husband before being abducted and imprisoned in an underground dungeon. Katie stated that she worked for her aunt and uncle. That was her purpose to her aunt growing up, whether it was to do the laundry, clean the toilets, or cook supper. She was basically her servant, but her service to Linda was secondary because the true monster in that house was nobody other than her uncle. Her godmother's husband sexually abused her from the time she was 2 years old. She had had enough when she was 7 years old and attempted to tell her godmother the truth about her husband, but her reaction only made matters worse. She called Katie a liar and told her to get out of her face. Katie was not permitted to attend school and grew up completely alone. Her only friend was John Esposito, a common family friend, but their relationship was special to her. Katie says,
I really didn't have any friends my own age. I think in my childhood, the thing that probably made me the happiest was when I got to spend time with John. I would say I loved him. He was always a confidant, somebody that I would trust.
But Katie's life was about to take a turn for the worse amidst all the abuse she had already endured. She was kidnapped 2 days before her 10th birthday. Katie was left with John that day, and they went to Spaceplex, her favorite place on Long Island. Big John and Katie were going to celebrate her 10th birthday together. Local children dubbed John Big John because he was a well-known member of the Big Brother Big Sister program. Her birthday was about to turn sour as the worst thing that could happen to a child occurred.
It was a man kidnapped me. He had a knife. Oh no, here he comes. I gotta go. Katie.
Linda, Katie's godmother, is the voice calling out her name. But while she was calling the cops, Big John was already on the scene at Spaceplex. They evacuated the area and searched for the rest of the day, but their efforts were futile.
He picked me up and carried me into the closet where I realized he was opening up a door to expose a tunnel.
That tunnel was carefully crafted by an expert and built behind the walls of his house. Katie had to crawl until she came to a trap door.
And then he exposes this hole and he opens up this door into this room.
The only word that I have to describe this room was a dungeon, a place that I couldn't escape.
Katie discovered a filthy mattress and a makeshift soundproof casket surrounded by chains inside.
I heard her say a man was coming after her with a knife, and she said, oh my God, here he comes. So by the time I picked up the phone to talk to her, I got nothing.
This is all Linda, the godmother, had to say about the unsettling call she received the day of the kidnapping. This concerned Dominic Verone, the chief of the Long Island Police Department's kidnapping division. Katie was nowhere to be found at Spaceplex, almost as if she'd never been there, because the only clue they had was a recording of Katie's distressed call to Linda. Verone decided to call the big guns.
We sent the audio tape of that telephone call, as well as the device that it was recorded on, to the FBI.
Verone continued his investigation while awaiting the FBI. Naturally, he began by investigating the most likely suspects: Marilyn Beers, her real mother, Linda Inghilleri, the godmother who employed her to run various errands, and Sal Inghilleri, who was accused of sexually abusing Katie Beers. However, there was a fourth suspect outside of the family, the last man to see her before she was abducted, John Esposito. The FBI eventually informed him of their findings. Katie's call appeared to have been made from a phone booth in front of Spaceplex, which is strange given that there was still no trace of her inside the recreation center.
I never forget the call I got from the scientists at the FBI lab who gave me the next bit of breaking news. It wasn't actually Katie who broke free and made that call. It was a recording. It was someone who tape recorded Katie and wanted us to believe, or it to seem, that the call came from that telephone booth next to Spaceplex.
As the detective began to piece together the puzzle, it became clear that the perpetrator had dumped them all. Katie's kidnapping has been exploited as a cover for something even more terrible.
The phone call was a scripted plot by an individual to make us think that Katie Beers was abducted.
Katie understood what was going to happen and chose to fight as hard as she could in the dungeon. She went to the casket door after noticing it was loose.
Eventually, I had kicked it long enough and hard enough that snapped, and I was able to kind of safely exit.
This was such a breakthrough for her that she thought she might finally be able to flee, almost forgetting that the casket was itself within the dungeon.
Then I had nowhere to go. I remember trying to go on the shelf and see if there was anything there that I could use for some sort of self-defense. And there were a bunch of keys up there. So unknowingly, I grabbed one of those keys and hid it underneath the mattress. As soon as he came down, he saw the door open, and he then raped me for the first time.
Her kidnapper assaulted her numerous times per day for the rest of her captivity. It was from the television that she got news of every step of the police who were trying to find her. An investigation into the family members was conducted, but nothing unusual was discovered other than Marilyn Beer's strong desire to reclaim her daughter. Katie saw that on TV and sobbed because she hoped to see her family again, this time her biological mother and her brother, Little John. The police then went on with the investigation of the least likely suspect, John Esposito. They searched his house and traced his footsteps, but couldn't find anything suspicious. The background check arrived the next day and was extremely suspicious. They discovered the dark truth about Big John after contacting the Big Brothers Big Sisters Association, which the suspect proudly claimed to be a member of.
John Esposito painted himself as a big brother. Detectives discovered that he tried to join that organization, and they did a background investigation on him. We learned that he had been involved in abduction of a 7-year-old child 15 years prior to Katie's disappearance, and they ruled him out as being a big brother. We were ramping up the pressure on him, following him wherever he went.
And in case you haven't guessed it yet, the kidnapper was, in fact, none other than John Esposito, aka Big John, who had been planning and scheming until the day he finally kidnapped Katie. The police became more convinced with each passing day that what we were going to find was a body of Katie Beers rather than an alive Katie Beers. A few days later, Katie awoke in the dungeon.
Esposito had put a chain around my neck. I had realized that the key that I had grabbed was actually for the padlock. So I was able to at least release myself. Prior to unattaching it, I would count how many links were on the end of it and up to the wall as well.
When she heard Esposito approaching, she quickly chained herself up in the same manner he did. John Esposito even tried to convince Katie to play dead so when the police found out about her death, they'd give up on her. But she refused. Katie confronted him to question his insanity.
How I was going to go to school, what I was going to do to survive. I wanted to get married and have kids. And he would always have witty remarks right away, like, oh, you'll have kids with me, you'll marry me, you'll do this with me. So I would always tell him, no, I don't want to do that.
Between the police presence, Verone's constant tailing, and Katie's nagging, Esposito cracked. He told her that he was planning to either end his life or flee. She knew if he'd let it happen, he'd either kill her or leave her to die in the dungeon.
So all of this pressure is mounting. He finally speaks to his attorney. He says, I have something very important to tell you. And he tells him, I know where Katie is. And the attorney says, what do you mean? He says, she's behind the wall.
And this is where everyone gets to know that Esposito wasn't a typical kidnapper, but a mastermind. He led police to the dungeon after 30-plus steps of unlocking it, which really perplexed the police.
There was a bookshelf with wheels on it, and you'd have to pull that. And then there was vinyl laid on the floor, and you pulled the vinyl back, and then there is a 200-pound concrete block that's there. And you had to know to go into the garage and get this block and tackle to hook it in the ceiling, to hook it into the 200-pound block, and then raise this block up. And then you drop down about 7 foot into this underground chamber, and then there's a passageway. And as you crawl, you dropped into this underground chamber where Katie was kept.
Verone was overjoyed to discover Katie still alive. Esposito was sentenced to 15 years in prison, while Katie immediately entered foster care where she found a family. Verone recognized Katie as a true survivor. Katie now has a husband and 2 children, and is living a life she always dreamed of. That brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Do let us know what you think about this story. Subscribe to the channel to never miss any updates. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching.